Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. In this video I will review the Netflix movie El Camino, which is a sort of epilogue to Breaking Bad. So the first part of this video will be spoiler free, so if you haven't seen the movie you can watch the first part of the video, but I will get into spoilers later on. And I'll be honest, my spoiler free section is going to be kind of short. I don't have that much to say about this in terms of spoiler free. Plus it's on Netflix, so it's very easy for you. So I should actually go out and watch it before watching this review. But anyway, a few things I want to talk about. I can talk about spoiler free. First thing is this movie, maybe you're unsure about it, and maybe you haven't seen Breaking Bad and you're wondering, is this movie watchable or is it an enjoyable film for those who haven't seen Breaking Bad? And my assessment on that would be, yeah, I think you could watch this movie and enjoy it and like it even if you know nothing about Breaking Bad, but I don't think you're going to like it as much. I don't think you can fully appreciate it unless you have seen Breaking Bad, because one thing I actually like about this movie is that it doesn't take the time to handhold you or get you caught up and remind you of things that happen. They just jump right into it and they just assume you already know what's going on. Now there is a 3-minute recap that Netflix has before the movie starts, so that is instrumental in those who haven't seen Breaking Bad, or for those who haven't seen it in a while and maybe don't remember it very well. It's a good reminder. But once the movie proper actually starts, they don't hold your hand at all. So the recap is good in that regard in case you're worried, oh, I don't really remember what happened. Watch the recap. It's like 3 minutes long. It will remind you. And it would sort of explain things like really quickly, though, for those who haven't seen the show at all. But I still think you don't get the full experience unless you have seen Breaking Bad, because I think the movie is well acted, well shot. I think it is a thoughtful piece on its own. So I think those who haven't seen Breaking Bad could still appreciate it. But a lot of the deeper meanings have to do with references to what happened in Breaking Bad, and it, of course, deals with Jesse's character, so it helps if you know all about Jesse's character and what he's been through. So I think it's more of a surface level enjoyment that you can get if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, but if you have, I think you get the deeper meanings behind the film. And of course it pretty much takes off right where the show left off in the finale. That's something that we're vague about, and I think Vince Gilligan actually, I watched an interview with him recently where he actually lied about this. He outright said it didn't take off right where the show left off, but it totally does. And that's sort of cat's out of the bag on that one. A lot of reviewers are saying that, like the very last scene, like the moment that ends, we jump straight into the movie, and that's where the movie begins. So it takes off immediately after where Breaking Bad left off. So in that case, it does help to have seen Breaking Bad. And a lot of people are saying that this does kind of feel like a 2-hour episode or 2 episodes of Breaking Bad rather than an independent movie. But I would argue that Breaking Bad was such a high quality TV show in the first place that it was already cinematic. So I would say it does feel cinematic in that regard. And the other thing is, I think this movie could be play as your typical indie film, sort of thoughtful crime drama. I think it does. It's very artistic, maybe even more so, I would argue, than the show was, although the show was pretty damn artistic too, depending on what episode. But with its cinematography and the music and just the slow pace, thoughtfulness style of it. Now, this style is always present in Breaking Bad, but it's not really what people remember the show for. People remember the show for more of the high-octane action moments that you have in the show. But if you watch it, if really look at it, most of the show is a lot of slow-paced, really just thoughtful, very cinematic character pieces, and that's definitely true. I think maybe even more so of Better Call Saul, and I would say this movie takes on more of that tone probably to the extent that Better Call Saul does. That this is a really slow-paced film. So if you're expecting this film to remind you, like, be high octane Breaking Bad, remind you of stuff like episodes like Face Off or Ozymandias, or shows where the stuff is getting blown up and there's cartel fights and stuff like that, then you might be a bit disappointed. And to be honest, when I first saw this movie, I felt the same way. I was a bit like, this is a bit slower pace and more boring, and not the high-octane action peak Breaking Bad that I was expecting it to be. But once I got over it, I was able to appreciate it for what it was. That you could say that it is a thought-provoking art house film, basically. And it was definitely a character piece. And in that regard, once I look at it through that lens, I appreciate it a lot more. In fact, this is a movie that after I watched it, the more it stuck with me, like in my thoughts, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. So I do think it is probably better not to have those expectations of this being a high action piece when really is think of it as more as a slow-paced character drama. Now, I know a lot of people, even those who liked the film, thought that the pace was a bit too painfully slow at times, and I disagree. I always give Vince Gilligan leeway on that. And so that leads me to my next topic I wanted to discuss, is that when this project was first announced, like a year or so ago, a lot of people were very skeptical. And in fact, I had even a few people come to me and ask me what I thought about it, because a lot of people were like, well, why do we really need more Breaking Bad? Is this just milking the franchise? I mean, is this really necessary? And that's a question I heard all the time. I still hear. Is it really necessary? Do we really need another Breaking Bad? And my answer to that was always, well, if Vince Gilligan says we need it, then we need it. If he says it's necessary, then it's necessary. Because he's earned my trust with how amazing Breaking Bad was and how amazing Better Call Saul was, even though I know Peter Gould mainly took over him for Better Call Saul, but still Vince Gilligan got the ball running and was involved in its creation. So anyone from his, even if it was Peter Gould, anyone from his creative team says that they have an idea for a story that they want to tell as a Breaking Bad epilogue, then yeah, absolutely, it's necessary. And frankly, I'm a bit shocked and honestly a bit irritated as well that I still hear people saying that even after they watch the film. Some people even is bold to say that it is not necessary, which I could not disagree with more. I think this was an amazing film. It was totally necessary because, first of all, this was a missing piece of the Breaking Bad finale. This was the biggest complaint I've heard of the Breaking Bad finale, which a lot of people, almost overwhelmingly, people love and think is one of the best finales out there. I know there are a few exceptions out there, but the vast majority see this as one of the greatest finales of all time, and I absolutely agree. But to be fair, that's not a high bar because most shows actually fumble their finale. But anyway, one of the complaints was that it didn't really service the character of Jesse Pinkman, that he got kind of tossed aside at the end. And I think that was kind of necessary, though, because Breaking Bad was always Walter White's story. So I think it was necessary for them to focus on him more, and really that ending was the best ending you could have had for Walter White. And Jesse Pinkman appeared in it as much as they needed to service his story. But then that did feel kind of leaving a bit hollow as far as Jesse was concerned, because he was also very important. Even though Breaking Bad is inarguably Walter White's story, Jesse was always a very important character, and he was the second most developed and most interesting character in the show, and he did get a lot of his own personal place. So I think that was an actual plot hole, that you didn't really know what happened to Jesse after he left that compound where he was driving away in the car in the El Camino, as they named this after, screaming. And so, throughout the years, there's been a lot of speculation. Some people have been actively upset over the fact that we didn't get a definitive ending for this character. There's like been memes where after he drives away screaming, the car like magically flies away or something, because everyone would like to assume that Jesse has a happy ending. And I think I even remember arguing that that last scene was indicating that he had somehow had a happy ending, but that's just an assumption, because as far as you know, the cops pick him up immediately. And in fact, I've heard that argument from a lot of people, because there was just a whole bunch of cop cars like coming towards the compound. So a lot of people said it was impossible for Jesse to get away. So they just assumed that he absolutely didn't, and he met a very bad ending. So I think it was necessary to tie up this loose end. And I think you could tell that Vince Gilligan did have the story to tell, that it was nagging him that they never really gave Jesse's story a proper ending. And so I think him wanting to do that was a huge motivation. It's not to milk more money out of the franchise. In fact, he specifically said that he doesn't really want to do any more Breaking Bad stuff. He just had a specific idea to do this. And this film does fill in those blanks, and therefore I think is needed to happen. I think it's an actual part of the story. Now, it's not... I still strongly believe and understand that why they didn't include this in the actual show, because the show, that would have been distracting. The show was about Walter White, and the show needed to end with his death, because that was the perfect place to end, because the show was always about him. So I think it makes the most sense in the world. We still need to see Jesse Pinkman's story, but not within the context of Breaking Bad. So it makes the most sense in the world to me to have a film about him that ties up his story. My only complaint about it would be that it took too long to do. Why did it take 6 years? We should have got this sooner. That's my only complaint, but better late than never, as they say. So as far as people saying, oh, this isn't necessary, I think they're absolutely 100% wrong. And that's just me. So anyway, well, I guess the spoiler-free section went on a bit longer than I thought it would, but still, I gotta end this here. So if you haven't seen the movie El Camino, I would recommend stopping the video right now. Thank you so much for watching. This will be a very, very strong recommend for me. So if you're on the fence, I would say, especially if you've seen Breaking Bad and liked Breaking Bad, absolutely go watch it. Do not listen to the people saying this isn't necessary. It absolutely is necessary, especially if you're curious. You like the character of Jesse Pinkman. You're curious about what happened to him. Definitely go watch it. Definitely. Anyway, I'm going to get into spoilers now. So, again, thanks so much for watching, for anyone who doesn't want to watch any further. But if you have seen the movie, let's go on into the spoilers. So I want to carry off what I was talking about just now, which was the ending. Because basically, I would describe this movie as, I think the way to sum this movie up is Jesse's fight for a happy ending. Because, as I said, that ending was very ambiguous. I know some people liked the ambiguity of it, but I didn't. I think Vince didn't either. I think he rightfully saw that we needed a more definitive ending. Because, as I said, I don't think it's good to leave it up to the imagination, because some people imagine that he immediately gets arrested and thrown in a dark cell for the rest of his life, which is still a very strong possibility. So I love that we got this definitive ending, and I think it was a very thought-provoking one. This is great writing. A lot of thought and energy was put into this, but as I said, it's not like an exciting action piece. It's more of a very indie, thought-provoking character art house piece. And yeah, so basically how I would sum up this movie is that it was Jesse's fight for a happy ending, because this starts with him being wanted by the law, and then he has all these other obstacles because he needs money. When he tries to get it, he runs into those other guys, and then he gets some money, but it's not enough, so he has to go back, and so it's all about him trying to make his happy ending because one's not handed to him. And that's what I love about having this movie and not just leaving it ambiguous and just assuming he had a happy ending, because he doesn't just get handed a happy ending because he's driving away yelling and screaming. We don't know what happened. He has to fight for that happy ending, and it's all about him sort of earning that happy ending and the journey he goes through in order to get it. So once we do get that happy ending, it feels a lot more satisfying, in my opinion, than the ending that he got in Breaking Bad, because we see first of all, we see definitively that he gets a happy ending, and secondly, we see that he earned that happy ending, that it was something he had to struggle for. Now, I do see a counter argument on how the villains in this film were kind of throwaway, but some people said the same things about the white supremacists in season 5, particularly the second half of season 5 of Breaking Bad, saying those villains were kind of throwaway. Because season 3 and 4 was all about Gus, who was an amazing villain. And so a lot of people felt shafted that instead of Gus, we got these stupid white supremacists that who cares about. But my argument there, and it would be the same one I would make here, is that the point about this movie, and the point about season 5, was season 5 of Breaking Bad, the point was not about the villains. The point was about a character study of Walter White. As I called it, there's 3 types of films that they'll teach you in film class. There's man versus man versus nature, and man versus himself. And although you can gender neutral those if you like, but anyway, it's an older thing. But so season 3 and 4 of Breaking Bad were arguably man versus man. It was Walt versus Gus. But season 5 was Walt versus himself. It was man versus himself, so the villains weren't really the point. And I would make the same argument here, that this film is man versus himself. It's not man versus man. So that way the villains don't have to be great, because ultimately they're inconsequential. The whole point is Jesse's own personal character journey, and those villains are just there to be a part of that, to tell his own personal story. And I love how different it is from Walter White's own personal story, his man versus himself. He arguably lost the fight because he lost it to his darker side. Throughout season 5, his darker side took over, and then towards the end of season 5, he faced the consequences of that, of allowing his darker side to take over. Whereas Jesse, I would say he wins the fight. He's triumphant over his demons, which of course the film does a great job in getting into his inner demons, the trauma that he suffered after being held prisoner, and the anger he feels of his loved ones being taken away from him. But he was able to conquer those demons and his fear of hurting people as well. And he was able to conquer his fear and his inner demons in order to do what needed to be done to earn himself the happy ending. And so that way, I thought it was a very successful film and very satisfying in that regard. Now, I want to talk about these cameos, the flashbacks that we get, because I've heard the argument that this is the same people think this film's not necessary. So, not very valid. But the argument from them saying that these flashbacks are like, ooh, look at these characters, isn't it cool to see them again? And that's absolutely wrong. That is flat out wrong. Especially I get from watching stuff like Star Trek Discovery or other things where they obviously just throw in, like the last season of Lost did this. I just talked about this, where they throw in characters who had been dead for a while. It's like, oh, remember them? Here they are again. And they don't really serve a purpose other than that. And that's absolutely not what this film does. And in fact, I really praise it for that, because each flashback is totally meaningful and really powerful, actually, in Jesse's personal character story. Because, there was a few people like the junkyard guy who came out. You could argue that's kind of a memory berry, but to me, I think it makes more sense to have establish characters when you can instead of having new ones. I think that's the opposite end. You got that what's the spectrum of just throwing in the old characters, just be like, oh, you remember them? And there's the other extreme where you have totally new characters. You don't use any older characters because you don't want to fork out the money for the actors or whatever reason. And it ends up you feel too disconnected. And I think this movie strikes right down the middle. It strikes that Goldilocks spot, the sweet spot of not relying too heavily on remember these, but at the same time not shying away from bringing back characters if it makes sense for the story. And getting back to the flashbacks in particular, I don't want to take credit for this because I didn't come up with this myself. In fact, I was wondering about the point of the flashbacks for a while after I saw this film until I watched a few reviews. One specifically from Darren Merrill on Screen Junkies, which I think I'm going to steal his phrase because he summed it up perfectly when he said that the flashbacks were advice that Jesse had been given in the past, but he wasn't at a point in his life where he's ready to take it. But he is at a point in his life where he's ready to take that advice. And I think that is dead on. And that's why those flashbacks were so powerful. And that's why they were shown. That's why they were relevant. It wasn't there to be like, oh, remember Walter White, remember Jane, who's like Jessica Jones or whatever, remember them? No, it's not that. It's what they use those flashbacks to show that advice that he was given that he was just didn't want to take or wasn't ready to take when he was giving it. But now, at this point in the movie, he totally is ready, and this is the advice that he's actually following, which I thought was pretty damn powerful. And I thought to open the whole film with him and Mike, and at first, like, it's been years since I've seen Breaking Bad, I'll admit, so at first I thought this scene was actually taken from the show, but from what I hear, it wasn't in the show, because I remember Jesse mentioning Alaska before, but I think it wasn't this with Mike. I think he talked to someone else about wanting to go to Alaska, so this is kind of the origin story of how he got that idea, I think. But anyway, the scene was so powerful to start the whole film on, because... And this is the advice that Mike gives to Jesse is when Jesse's like, I want to right what's wrong. And Mike says, no, you can't do that. This is the one thing you cannot do. The only thing you can do is find a happy ending for yourself. Which is really powerful because it kind of speaks to Mike's backstory, which we've seen in Better Call Saul. That Mike was a cop whose son was killed and he went and got revenge, but that didn't really make anything right. So he's speaking from experience, so it's good to have that extra context if you've seen Better Call Saul. But on top of that, it's an example of Jesse not ready to take this advice because he doesn't. Because he throws away, and this is referenced later in the film, he throws away his chance to run away with the disappearer guy, which he now says he deeply regrets for revenge. Because once he heard that Walter White, tried to, when he poisoned Brock, he was so angry he let his revenge and his desire to make things right override him, and that ended up leading him down a dark path. And so I think he's learned from that, and he's learned that to take Mike's advice, that you can't set things right. You can only do what's best going forward, which I thought was damn powerful of a character story. And then, of course, you get towards the end of the film, you get the flashback with Walter White, which is, again, Walter, this is before he went all crazy off the hills, but he's expressing that Jesse, I'm at the end of my life, and it's actually true. Even though he survived the cancer, he still ended up dying shortly after. He's saying, I'm at the end of I think he got the cancer back, but anyway, that's not what he died from anyway. But anyway, he's like, I'm at the end of my life. You're still young. You still have a lot of potential. You could still do a lot. You don't need to throw your life away the way I did. And Jesse does. He does get caught up in all this, and he throws his life away, but he's realizing that he has a second chance to not throw it away. And that's why it's important to show this scene at the end of the film, because this once he's gotten away from Albuquerque and is on his way to live his new life, he's remembering that as necessary. And then, of course, the most poignant scene is the one with Jane. And I did, at first, I kind of questioned using Jane instead of, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the other woman from season 4 and 5 who was killed by Todd. Seems like she would be more recent on his mind. But what I think they wanted to get Kristen Ritter, obviously. But this kind of advice sounds like something she would say anyway. And I do think, like, the relationship Jesse had with Jane, I think, was a bit more powerful, even though it didn't last as long. But it was because the advice that she gave him was that, because she said before, when she said, let destiny take you wherever, is that's actually bullshit, because she's saying, I've been letting destiny take me everywhere my whole life and it's got me nowhere. You have to make your own path. And that's definitely kind of the whole point of the movie. That Jesse was, like before, he was letting his anger control him. He wasn't really thinking about his future when Walter White was suggesting you go to college. He was like, yeah, whatever, I'll just do this meth thing. And he just was always letting the moment take him places. And this whole film was about him putting it into that and taking control, making his own path, making his own destiny, facing his demons in order to face that. So that scene was so heartfelt, so touching. Again, I think it does kind of bring it back that, as I said in my spoiler-free section, that if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, you probably can't appreciate the deeper themes as much, because a lot of deeper themes rely on an understanding of everything that Jesse's been throughout the course of the show. And I think when you see it, you see that there's so much power and depth to this movie that is absolutely amazing. Now, let me talk about the bulk of the film, because a lot of people saying, particularly the flashbacks with Todd, were rather boring and dragged on for too long. I disagree. I mean, they were definitely slow paced. I cannot argue with that. But I think, again, this is the kind of style I've gotten used to, particularly with Better Call Saul, that has this really slow paced, maybe even more so, arguably more so than Breaking Bad. So I've kind of gotten used to this. I think it was done in a very powerful way. It was showing how, by letting this tension drag out, and it was also showing the relevance. There was also a weird contrast too, because it actually shows. I absolutely love that scene when they're in the desert and after they bury the maid, and Todd finds the gun and how he pulls it out, and he's like really itching to kill Todd, but he knows that if he does that, then Brock is as good as dead, and he's still like facing his inner demons because he doesn't want to go back to that life of torture and pain. But he knows that if he is like his inner struggle, and Todd could see them having this struggle. And I love how Todd just, instead of being an asshole about it, he tries to distract him and be like, oh, I think you ordered some pizza. What's your favorite kind of pizza? Like, that was such a powerful scene. And I love how Todd actually hugged him. Like, Jesse flinched at first because he thought Todd was... I actually thought Todd was going to hit him once he got the gun back, because that's the way most, like, typical bad guys would act. Be like, oh, yeah, I'm your friend. I love you. Until he hands the gun back and it's like, fuck you! But it was, to me, was so much more powerful and so much more interesting that he didn't do that he actually hugged Jesse. Because in a way, I think Todd actually does care for Jesse, but in a really fucked up way, because Todd is a fucked up guy. And I think it's a pretty strong case could be made that Todd is a psychopath. Because, or a sociopath, or however you want to say it. He has no feelings of remorse over. He just kills so casually. So he's definitely a psychopath. But in his twisted, fucked up brain, he actually does like Jesse and have feeling for him and appreciates him. He just feels keeping him captive is necessary because that's what his Uncle Jack tells him to do, and so he has to do what his Uncle Jack tells him to do, but he has no ill will towards him himself. He's just a fucking psychopath and incapable of feeling empathy. But you still feel that. I don't know if I would express this as empathy when he hugs Jesse, but I would say it's definitely, he genuinely means it. I don't think he's just doing that for show. So I thought those scenes with him were very powerful, and of course it really helped set up what Jesse was going through in current times of trying to find Todd's money. And of course, the scene where he remembers the dude from the wreckage place, how he was tortured, and we get how he was humiliated and just treated like shit. And that was very, very poignant for Jesse's character as well. So I ultimately disagree that this movie was too slow paced. I mean, it was slow paced, as I said, I won't argue with that, but it was not too slow paced. It didn't drag on too much, as people say. I think these scenes were very well acted, very well shot. As I said, if you look at this more as a art house indie film, a lot of the art house indie films have the same sort of feel and slow pace, and I would say this is exactly, in fact I would argue that this movie pulls it off a lot better than most of these art house films do. So I also got to talk about Badger and Skinny Pete. Like, that moment was also very heartfelt, very touching. It was just close to tears on those scenes. I mean, these characters are always, again, I love how the show, because Jesse, and especially like Skinny Pete and Badger, are shown as, just drug addicts, worthless drug addicts, but it shows that they actually have like heart of gold. And I love how like Skinny Pete's willing to do all this stuff for him, and Jesse is like questioning, is like, why would you do this for me? And he's like, because you're my hero. Like that. That was so touching. It was just such a great use of these characters. Again, this is another example, I would say, of why you shouldn't shy away from using established characters, because this is the perfect way to use established characters. But the one thing I will say is probably the biggest complaint I have about this movie is that if you've seen the trailer, there's a trailer that shows Skinny Pete talking to the police and saying, I'm not going to tell you where Jesse is. Jesse's been through hell and blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't in the movie. I was very disappointed. I think that scene should have been in the movie. I guess maybe they thought it sort of messed up the flow to have, because we've really just been following Jesse's perspective for the whole movie. So maybe they thought it would mess up the flow by having someone else's perspective. But I think it really explained their relationship, and it also explained why sort of Jesse was in the right for wanting to get away. So I guess that trailer could be seen as kind of a deleted scene. Maybe it was a deleted scene and they made it into a trailer instead, but I still really think it should have been in the movie proper, me personally. But that is one thing I love about this movie, is that Jesse is a drug dealer. He made drugs. He's killed a couple of people. He's a criminal. He's a bad guy. But in the end, you ultimately root for him, because you know that he's nice at heart. You know that he was just caught up in a bad situation. You want to see him get away. You want to see him get a second chance, much like what Skinny Pete was saying. So that's also the point of the film, and that's actually very powerful. That a film was able to pull that off. And of course, having 5 years of the TV show behind it certainly doesn't hurt. It certainly helps. Another familiar character we see is the disappearer, the guy who owns the carpet company, played by Robert Forster, who just appeared in one episode of Breaking Bad. He was in, what's it called, The Granite State, the penultimate episode of the show. But he was mentioned throughout the show. Like, they always mentioned the disappear. We didn't actually physically see the guy until that second to last episode. But this is another example of why I love how they didn't shy away from using familiar characters, because it was absolutely vital to have this character. And I love the use, because he was so true to character. Even though he was only in that one episode, you got a really strong sense of the character, played by a really good actor. He does such a good job. And it made so much sense that he would squabble over a mere $1,800 when, like, Jesse was going to pay him $250,000 I believe that's how much he was going to pay him, and he was just like, "Oh, you're $1,800 short," and he was like, "Seriously?" But that's so true to the kind of guy he was. It's also so true to his character that he would force him to repay the trip that he missed. It's like, you're gonna have to pay double because you have to pay for the one you missed, and then because he's really strict and proper like that. I think Saul made this very clear about him before we ever saw him on screen, but once we did see him on screen, like, I loved his interaction. Some people didn't like that episode of the Granite State, but I loved it because I love his interactions between him and Walter White, and how he was like straight up. Like, Walter White is like, if I die, will you give this money to my family? And he's just like, well, if I said yes, would you believe me? Like, that just speaks to the kind of guy he is. So he's not really a good guy, but he's true to his word, because eventually, of course, he does take Jesse to Alaska. But once he has a certain amount of money, and I think that was like a great way to sort of frame the dilemma, Jesse's dilemma as well, is that he had to get $1,800, so he has to go back to the other guys. And some people are complaining that the shootout was a bit silly, and okay, maybe a little bit, but the guys were kind of coked up, so I can kind of see that happening. So I actually thought that whole scene was intense, and as I said, even though it wasn't the best action scene ever, that's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is Jesse's own personal demons and the struggle he has to go through to earn his freedom, to earn his happy ending. And I think that was absolutely done so well. And so then, really quick, I want to mention there's a couple Easter eggs in the film that I didn't pick out, but one that I did definitely hit me right away is when the strippers, or I think they're just strippers, when they show up to the junkyard where Jesse's hiding and waiting to make his move, there was this big, huge bodyguard, and he was sleeping in the car, looking after them. And as soon as I saw him, I'm like, that's Man Mountain. I think his name is Clarence or something, but I call him Man Mountain, who appeared in Better Call Saul. And I love that they actually had a Better Call Saul reference. Because if you recall, in season 1, there was the episode Plemento where Mike went to do the bodyguard job, whatever, and there was two other guys. One was the dude from The Walking Dead, Simon, and he was being a dick to Mike and saying, "Oh, you don't have a gun," blah, 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 and Mike kicked his ass. And sitting next to him was that huge tall guy, and Simon referred to him as Man Mountain. So that's just why I call him Man Mountain from now on. And how once Mike kicked Simon's ass and Simon ran off, he was like, he turned to Man Mountain and was like, "Here, do you want a gun?" And he just ran off. Like, that was great. And he also appeared in, I believe, season 4 of Better Call Saul. He appeared later in Better Call Saul as well, when Saul wanted to, there's these kids who robbed him, and he wanted to teach them a lesson, so he hired 2 bodyguards to scare the crap out of him. One was Huel, and the other was Man Mountain. And at first I didn't recognize him. I had to look it up. But as soon as I saw him here, I'm like, hey, it's Man Mountain. So I guess, and because Better Call Saul's prequel was taking place years before, so I guess we eventually learned what happened to him. He ended up being a bodyguard for a bunch of strippers where he just falls asleep in a van. Which is, I don't know, I thought that was a pretty cool cameo. Anyway, so once Jesse has the money and he takes it to Robert Forster, or the disappearer, which I always didn't like that term. I think something like the vanisher or something else would have been better than disappearer. I don't know. But anyway, and he actually disappears to Alaska. And I actually love this, and especially you contrast that to the other 2 people we saw him disappear. One was Walter White, who for some reason had to stay in isolation in the cabin in the middle of nowhere. Oh, for some reason, because he was incredibly wanted. So he didn't have the freedom of going around free. He had to stay in the cabin, and Robert Forster had to make regular visits to bring him supplies. And then there was Saul Goodman, course, Jimmy McGill, and who had to be disappeared to Nebraska, where he became a Cinnabon general manager. And we see, with a few scenes in Better Call Saul, how that turned out, and it didn't turn out very well. Now, with Walter White, he hated his existence to the point where he just left it and decided to go get revenge and die. With Saul Goodman, you can see through Better Call Saul that he's a broken man. He hates his existence because he feels he was at his. The show makes it clear, and I think that's kind of the whole point of Better Call Saul, that when he was Saul Goodman, he was at his prime. That's when he felt the best parts of his life. And now he feels like his life is withering away as a Cinnabon manager in the middle of nowhere, and that he's an empty shell of a man. So it's interesting to contrast that to Jesse, who actually is happy. He's the only one who does get the happy ending. In fact, arguably, he's one of the only characters in the entire show that gets a happy ending. I suppose you could say Skyler and Walt Jr. do because they end up getting the money from the Elliot or whatever. But there's still, I wouldn't call that a happy ending because their lives are still kind of ruined by Walt. But Jesse, I would say, is the one who he suffered the most too in the show. So I think it makes empirical sense for him to be the one to get the happiest ending, and that's something that the audience wanted to see. So that's another reason why I think we needed this movie. It's totally necessary because we can't have it ambiguous of whether or not Jesse has the happy ending, because this character damn well deserves one, and it was so completely satisfying to see him earn, like the whole movie about his journey of earning this happy ending, and once he gets it, I think it's amazing that he's the one who actually is the only one we've seen who benefits from the Disappear, who actually is happy in his new life. And I think the Disappear's line before he goes, where he says, this place is, peace and quiet, and it seems like you could use that about now. And that's dead on. That's like a meta that explains his character story. That explains everything, that he could use quiet. He could use things that are uneventful. Like people like Walter White and Saul Goodman, they hate the quiet. They want the excitement. They want the roughness. They miss it, particularly Saul Goodman. But Jesse's the other way. Jesse has had this rough life. He went down the wrong path. He let the universe guide him, like Jane was saying, instead of making his own destiny, instead of taking Walt's advice and making something of his life. And now he has that opportunity to live a peaceful, quiet life. But his peace is something that he had to earn. And so I think it's absolutely the perfect ending. And I love how when he's driving, the last shot of the scene of the movie is him driving away down the road in Alaska, and he kind of has this half smile on his face, and that's the perfect way to contrast his ending in Breaking Bad, because Breaking Bad, you had the ending where he's screaming and yelling, he doesn't know if to cry, to yell out of anger or excitement or relief or whatever. He's just so much bent up emotion and just high tension, but here, after he's been through this journey and this inner journey, which the flashbacks I think were very vital in expressing that this is the kind of journey that he took, where he finally gets to the point where he's at peace and he's looking forward to living a happy, peaceful life, and then it ends. So this is a beautiful movie, and that ending just definitely had me in tears, I will say, and it was so well earned. Now, Vince Gilligan said that he didn't want to do more Breaking Bad because he saw this as a definitive ending for Jesse, and I totally agree. We definitely do not need to see Jesse again after this. Doing so would ruin his character, because in order to have a movie or a show or something, you have to have drama, and I think the whole point is that there will be no more drama in Jesse's life, that he's going to live a peaceful life from now on. So this is the perfect place to end it. And as for visiting other characters, I think they've done that enough. Once they finish Better Call Saul, I think they should wrap it up. And I think Vince Gilligan agrees on that. Although he said, if something else strikes me that I need to do it, then I'm going to do it. But otherwise, I'm looking to do other things. And that's what I said, that this movie struck him as something that needed to be done. And I 100% agree with that. And so I get irritated when I see these clickbait videos out there like, oh, is it necessary? Does it need to happen? Yes. End of discussion. Any other answer is wrong. Anyway, my rating for El Camino out of 10 is a 10 the best. And I don't make this lightly. I was going to give it a 9 at first, and I was thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more I love this movie. The more I think it's a masterpiece. The more I don't care how slow paced it is. It is beautifully shot, beautifully acted. This is definitely a Oscar-winning performance by Aaron Paul here. Although people were saying that he should be nominated for an Emmy, but wouldn't it be an Oscar? Because this film was shown in movie theaters, and in the past it made it clear that Netflix films that are shown in even in limited release are eligible for Oscars. So I think he's deserving of an Oscar. It would be good because the Emmys are worthless anyway. But it would be good for him to finally get one. And I think he totally deserves it. And I think the cinematographer deserves an Oscar for best cinematography. I think this is an amazing character piece that's very deep and thoughtful. It's an amazing art house film, regardless of whether or not you've seen the show. Anyway, that is it for my review of El Camino. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, you can check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Mr. Robot, Star Trek, Lost, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.